How's it going? Where are you playing out of?
Living the dream. We are Wynn Encore in Las Vegas.
Wynn Encore in Las Vegas. So, what size game is this one you're playing in?
This is 2.5.
Okay.
Like I said, 1500 max, nine-handed.
Okay. And how deep are you?
We're 1600 effective. We've got an infrequent straddle on. There's two kind of splashy tourist recreational players who are the only ones who are straddling.
Okay.
And the straddle is on in this hand because one of the rec tourist is in the straddle.
Okay.
So it starts off the under the gun. Under the gun one first act, who is about 1800 deep, fairly solid player. Don't know him, but have watched him, played with him a few times. He opens to 30, and I am next in middle position with six of spades, six of diamonds.
Six of spades, six of diamonds, and +2.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's a little bit borderline. I fold sometimes, but I opt to flat here, especially with the splashy player in the straddle. And just how the game was flowing at that point.
Yeah, I would say on paper, this is a full. I mean, obviously, the closer you are to the button, the more flatting you can do. Depending, if it's a really squeeze happy game, it probably should be a fold. You know how those types of games, like if you're in a tough game and you start flatting from +2, you're getting squeezed like, just absolutely a ton. Now, where of course I deviate from this is if it's a passive game, and especially if the +1 guy is somebody that I think is going to lose a lot of money with like overpairs and things like that. I know you want to sort of keep the straddle in, you call, you're going to give, this recreational player like, good odds. But when we set mine though, you got to kind of think about like you want to attack a tight range, and that's usually from the under the gun player. Yeah, I mean, like the straddle could, he could complete with like queen 4 suited and the board comes out like queen 6 deuce and you flop middle set, but he still only has queen 4 as opposed to like the under the gun guy who might have aces or kings.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it was borderline. A lot of times I do fold there. Just kind of like as watching how the game was playing. I was actually probably sat down for maybe 45 minutes. So that was the reason there wasn't a whole lot of 3-bet squeezing. So action folds around to the small blind, who is an older reg who's got about 2K deep. He flats, and then the big blind. Excuse me. This actually I got it wrong in the email, but it was actually the straddle, who then 3-bets to 165.
165.
Yes.
So under the gun 130, hero calls from +2, somewhat speculative with 6-6. Small blind calls, and now the straddle 3-bets to 165. What does the under the gun +1 do?
Under the gun +1 does not take too long and flats.
Well, this is one that's kind of interesting here because now you actually have, a lot of times like you want to sometimes be able to get this hand heads up so you can sometimes continue and win without showdown, without equity realization. Now it's just kind of a pure set mining type of hand here. This other guy has come in. This guy, it seems to me like you think, especially if it's a recreational player, this is kind of one of the strongest spots for somebody to 3-bet, like the strongest range if he's not like 3-bet bluffing, because he can just call with all his in-between hands, like queen, jack, and things like that. So he probably does have a pretty tight range. Now, you were already in for 30, so it's 135 more. You guys only started with 1,600. It's only 135 more. So, I kind of want to be a little bit deeper here. Like if you looked, 20 times.
It's around 11x. It's not quite to the 15x sizing that we'd normally be looking for. But like you said, I do put the straddle on a fairly strong hand just because I don't see a lot of rec players in a position like that do, squeezing with the, suited connectors very often in a setup like that. And then also I figure I'm closing the action as well for the fact that the small blind, who I know pretty well, if he had any hand of 10s plus, he would have squeezed out of the small blind. And the fact that he's behind, he actually may call as well and make it 4-way, because we would have heard from him if he had a strong hand before.
It's interesting to point out, as Nate, one of our coaches, it's under the gun 1 should be playing a lot of 4-bet or fold here. There are some hands that are a little bit in between. They're kind of too good to fold, but maybe don't want to 4-bet against like a really tight range, maybe like 10s, jacks, ace queen suited, things like that. But I'd be doing a lot of 4-betting from the +1 spot. So that's interesting that he calls. It sounds to me like you call.
Yeah, I did call, and part of it, and to your point, the under the gun player. I think that really caps his range. I'm not putting him on, queens plus. I mean, he might flat queens or something along those lines, but I'm probably putting him more in, high suited cards, mid pairs as well.
Right. And the only thing I would say about that is just that there's always the possibility of you getting overset here too.
Exactly.
So does the small blind call as well?
No, the small blind folds.
Okay.
So we go to the flop. There's 530 in the pot after the $5 rake.
Okay. So 530 three ways in a 3-bet pot. Okay.
Flop comes out 8 of spades, 6 of hearts, deuce of spades. So it's pretty interesting at this point. The big blind checks.
You mean the straddle?
Or the straddle, excuse
Yep.
me. Yeah, straddle checks, excuse me. And the under the gun player checks as well.
So straddle checks, UTG checks,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's on you. That's kind of interesting because, again, most recreational players are not checking over pairs on a spot like this. And then when I said under the gun +1 has somewhat of a tighter kind of range, I would think that like 9s through jacks, once the straddle checked, would be doing a fair amount of protection betting here if they think the straddle is like betting off with a lot of overpairs. So that's an interesting check. So he might not have a pair here either.
Yeah, absolutely. And my thought process there too is, for a lot of for both of these players, the straddle, I probably don't give as much of a thinking tendencies to, but the under the gun player, I think that he would recognize that 6s and deuces are probably somewhat unlikely, and really like the only set I should have there is 8s. I mean, occasionally 6s, but definitely not deuces. So at that point, I figured that there's a decent chance that the straddle has somewhat of a, like I said, I still could see him having an overpair in this case.
You think so?
I see it a lot where the recreational players will look for check raises on again, that's kind of it's an in-between board where it's not really not really straight draw happy, but with the flush draw, I see a lot of check raises in spots like that.
Well, I mean, that's interesting. And I have seen that too, but I mean, I think that this all leans towards making somewhat of an actual smaller bet sizing to try to get the weaker parts of ranges, to try to like incentivize like an ace king or something like that to call. But then if you think the guy's going to check raise, then he's going to check raise over small sizing too. So I would tend to not go large here. I might go 175, something like that.
Yeah, you're right on in terms of a little bit. I went a little bit smaller there. I led for 125, trying to induce a check raise. Maybe even the under the gun might look for a check raise at this point with a spade draw.
So you go 125. So that is pretty small. Okay.
And sure enough, the big blind check raises to 385.
Straddle.
Third blind in this case. The straddle check raises to 385.
To 385. Interesting. Now, what is the guy does the guy in between get out of the way?
He got out. He folds fairly quickly, which I was happy to see, because that pretty much eliminates the set of 8s at that point. I mean, of course, it eliminates the set of 8s, but that was the one hand where I thought, that I could put him potentially on the set of 8s.
Well, this is another one where it's interesting because, again, you're basically looking at a straddle from a recreational player, really, really 3-betting out of a very, very strong configuration. We talked about that. And then making an incredibly strong play. I could count the number of times like a recreational player finds like an ace-king bluff here or something like that. So he's got just a shit ton of overpairs. And the thing is that you have position, and if you call, obviously, you're going to add like another, 770 into the pot. So the pot's going to be like $1,300, and you guys will have like 1,100. So it's not like you need to build the pot. Like if you call, you go to the turn with like less than 1 SPR. So when you look at this, you're like, well, I could make my hand look like, it's jacks or 10s and I'm not ready to fold, and I can just call. And then if a blank comes, he'll bet out and we can just get it in. On the flip side to that, if the guy literally is never folding, you can just come back over the top all. And I'll point out here that I have actually made this play 3-betting in your spot actually as a bluff when I thought that somebody might check raise fold and overpair. I've actually made this play like on this board, like with a hand like 5-6 suited in a backdoor or something like that. But it takes the right type of player that I think might check raise fold and overpair. So the reason why I just bring that up is because the whole reason for calling only here would be that you'd be scared that the guy might check raise fold and overpair. So if you were up against that, you can sometimes, it's a very unique situation, absolutely blast a guy who check raises as the preflop raiser on a board like this and never has any of the sets. If you think that they're capable of folding, I've actually made that play. It actually hasn't worked all that often, but I made that play. So,
and that's one of the things that I was taking into consideration is I see a decent amount of the time people will kind of find those hero folds, especially on the flop, whereas they won't let it go on the turn, especially if it's a total blank or something along those lines. So, and the way I looked at it was really the only spades I was putting him on were ace king of spades and maybe ace queen of spades, just because this type of player I'm not seeing 3-bet squeezing with ace or king queen or king jack of spades or 9-10 of spades or something along those lines. So in terms of the flush draws, I'm not really worried about it outside of the ace king and sometimes ace queen. So
yeah, and I mean the only scare cards here really that are going to scare him pretty much are a spade. I would just just before you go on and tell me what you're going to do to keep it consistent. Okay. Now are you calling from +2 with 9-10 of spades? Maybe you're not. Although 6-6 was a sort of speculative call, but if you kept it consistent and you had a hand like 9-10 of spades here, and you bet the flop and this guy check raised you, again, I would say for the same reasons you're just calling now, you should be 3-betting jamming. So if you're not comfortable 3-bet jamming 9-10 of spades, then I would just jam now with 6-6 if you follow me. Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And in that case, I would most likely play this hand almost the same.
Okay.
And in the scenario you laid out, if I have 9-10 of spades here, I'm actually probably flatting a little bit more often just because, in terms of the hero, getting him to hero fold, like you said, he will do that sometimes, but when I have just such a heavy draw there, I'd probably peel one off there.
No, but I would want to add the max. I mean, like I said, for the same reasons, you're not 3-betting here because you're scared he's going to fold an overpair. You should play 9-10 of spades that way. So if you're playing this as a call because you're scared you're going to lose him on an overpair, you should play 9-10 of spades as a jam. That keeps it logical. You know what I'm saying? That keeps it logical. But it sounds to me like you called.
Yeah, I did opt to call just because it would be like you said, 1,300 in the pot, 1,000 back. Makes a lot of easy. Either he might jam or I can just shove on the turn 2 blanks. So that's what we did. We ended up flatting.
Okay. So now we're heads up. 8-6 deuce, 2 spades here with 6-6. And what's the turn?
And I do have the 6 of spades for just
okay.
minor.
Yep, you do. Yep.
Turn is the ace of spades.
Okay, so that's interesting because now he can never have the nut flush draw, right?
Exactly.
But he can have ace-ace, but I mean he can also have other overpairs as well. I mean that's a bad card for you in the sense that it's a horrible action killing card for you. If he has an overpair.
Exactly. If he's got queens, jacks, kings, he's going to shut down a lot of times and probably find the fold often. So it was, again, to your point, eliminates the nuts flush there.
Mm-hmm.
I had kind of eliminated the smaller flushes from his range.
Sure.
So then the villain just open jams.
Well, for what is it, like
1,050?
1,050?
Yeah.
There's no way I'm folding here. There's no way I'm folding here when the ace of spades comes and he can't really have, I mean, if he's got king, queen of spades, so what, so be it. And you might run into ace here too. But I could see a guy doing this with like kings with a spade, queens with a spade, just not even knowing and just jamming it in. I mean, you're going to be getting, because again, I mean, the reason, the case for somebody to fold here would be like you're behind what, pocket aces?
Yeah, I mean, there's 3 combos of pocket aces, and then from a value perspective, and then when I looked at it, looking at any of the possible combos that he might kind of turn his hand into a bluff a little bit would be an ace with the king of spades, and there's 3 combos of that left. And then,
Right, but that's a big assumption though, because that
yeah,
assumes that he made that play as a check raise with ace king. Now, when's the
yeah,
last time you see these guys do that? On the flop, I mean. The flop was 8-6 deuce.
especially from this player type,
Yeah.
that would be something. So more likely, if he did have something, it would be kings with the king of spades, which there are 3 combos of.
I just think that when a guy puts in this amount of, like, he check raises flop, he's a recreational player and he's got an overpair, and now you got less than like a pot size bet left, 1,050. He might just be going with any card here, especially just if he just has a spade. Like I said, you might run into like ace some of the time. And also, I think that like king queen of spades, which is like the other hand that he might 3-bet out, which, you know, kind of kills you just because he's so strong. If he even 3-bets that out of the straddle, that does like a whole lot of betting on this flop as opposed to check raising. You have to have a lot of, I think, uncommon things happen for him to show up with king queen of spades. He's got a 3-bet out of the straddle. He's got to play this as a check raise on the flop, right? So I'm not really concerned about any real spades here. It's really just pocket aces or nothing at all.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. So 1,050. Did you call?
Yeah, I pretty much snapped off. I just said to him, "Hey, if you ran into the ace, that's on me." So.
Yep. And what happened?
One of those most shocking hands I've probably seen in a while. He tables ace king offsuit with no spade.
Wow. So he had ace king.
He had ace king.
And he's drawing dead.
And he was drawing dead.
Wow.
I was more expecting, like I said, maybe he's got the king of spades there sometimes if he was going to make that play there. But no, it was ace king offsuit.
Wow.
No spade.
Wow. So hero stacks him. V1 with ace king. That's an interesting one. You know, I had a meeting, you know, we're developing some content for new coursework that's going to be coming out in a few months with Nate. And I know Nate's in the live chat here. I had a call with him. We were talking about some stuff, and it brings up an interesting point, Nate, and for all you guys too. I've talked about this sometimes, but it's more with restrictive stacks where I used to see some good players it would be like a 3 or 4-bet scenario, and you'd go to a flop and you get this rag board. And I used to see a play where people would actually make a check raise all in with ace king as the pre-flop 3-better or 4-better, where it would be like a pot size check raise. And you can kind of picture that. And it's kind of something that's sort of fallen by the wayside a little bit as people just have kind of taken smaller sizing and tried to play a 3-street game, even with 1 SPR. But if you look at it, there could be some times where you can have ace king and sometimes actually play it as a post-flop semi-bluff in certain situations. I'm not giving the credit for this guy doing anything advanced in a situation like that. Or ace king with the ace of spades would be a little bit better of a structure. But I mean, when you're coming out of an extremely tight configuration and you have a lot of value hands, and especially on a board where you don't think a whole lot of sets are going to be represented here, like if we didn't even think that you were going to call with 6-6, you might only have 8-8 only. If you bet out here with you were a double flatter, but let's say you had 9s or 10s and decided to not initially 3-bet the +1 open, it's a real tough continue for you if you get check raised on the flop out of the straddle, from the straddle, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. No, it's something like that.
It's not a play that you see every day, but it's
no, and I might not even, with that configuration, I may just check it back with 9s or 10s there, even though it got checked to me.
Well, it's
borderline.
I would still bet, but I'm just saying that you can see how somebody can actually put some pressure on you sometimes with that. But that's definitely one that I was not expecting from a recreational player. Thank you very much for the call. I appreciate it.